Hi everybody, and welcome back to an invisible and invisible illness awareness project. This week I want to talk about my experience taking a wheelchair in the airport. As you can see, I'm standing here right now. It's not that I can't walk at all, but I just get really exhausted if I have to stand or walk for more than 10 minutes, and dealing with traveling is a lot. I was really lucky in this particular day because I had an elevator where I was staying and could take my bags down that way. The tram was right outside the door. From the tram, I was right in front of the train station, and the elevator was working there. So the trip to get to the airport was actually a lot easier than it could have been. A lot of times you have to deal with dragging your bags down the stairs, walking to the tram or train, and back up the stairs, down the stairs, all of that. So it was definitely a relief that I managed to get there without having to break a sweat. Once I got there, I was standing in line for a really long time, and I realized that that was really rough, just standing there. And I really just wanted to sit, but I felt like there was nothing I could do. But then once I finally got to the front of the line, I'm like, well, I'm standing here on my own feet. I've got backpack on my back. I look perfectly able-bodied. So when the guy checked me in and asked if I really wanted a wheelchair, I was like, well, how far away is it? And he said it's only 5 minutes, so I thought, yeah, okay, I can walk. Not a good idea, because after standing there for so long, I was just so delirious that I was walking around for the longest time trying to figure out what direction I was supposed to be going in. Finally, I found a line and thought, okay, this must be the line for security. That line wound down and back down again. It was really long. I was just beside myself having to stand there and trying to get the attention of somebody. And finally, once I went down one direction at the very end, I got someone's attention, and he said you can go in the fast line, but I was still waiting a long time standing there. And I got to the front, there was an issue, and I had to stand and wait for them. And I was just like, is there somewhere I can sit while I wait? But there's no benches, and if you're standing there on your own, they're not going to assume that you have any sort of issues. So I really regretted not taking the wheelchair then, and once they finally let me through, I had to rush to my gate, and the people at the gate were really surprised that I showed up without a wheelchair. But I also discovered that I wasn't even supposed to be in that line in the first place. I'm sure the line where I was supposed to be was a lot shorter and would have gone a lot faster, but still would have been too much. And the fact is, I didn't find the line because I was already just so out of it from everything before that. So I really should have taken the wheelchair. During my layover, I did in fact accept the wheelchair. I walked out of the plane, there was somebody waiting, and I said, maybe that's for me. The guy said, he checked his list, he said, yeah, that's you. And basically zoomed through the airport. He said it was pretty far from one terminal to the next, so I was definitely glad that I didn't have to walk. You know, at that point I was still kind of asking, like, well, if it's the terminal right next to where we're at, then I'll walk, you know, just trying not to create any extra trouble for anybody. So we sped through customs, and there was nobody there. And then he left me at the gate because we had some time until takeoff, and he said, I'm going to come back to help you board. And I'm like, oh, well, you know, I can board by myself. Again, that was a mistake, because the people in the wheelchairs were taken onto the plane first. But since I didn't have somebody to escort me onto the plane, I was kind of stuck waiting with the parents and their babies, and I was sitting down and they were standing in line, so I ended up behind them, standing a lot longer than I wanted. Even being that close to the front of the line, I was still way too exhausted to be standing for any amount of time at all. So again, I wish that I had just let them help me board the plane. Once I finally arrived, it seemed like they were kind of unprepared because they didn't have enough wheelchairs for everybody, and I took the last one, but there was still somebody on the plane and they had to call another one for him. But this guy wheels me out to baggage claim and then went to go check on something, and I was just left sitting there for the longest time, and I kept thinking, I just want to get up and go, but then, you know, I need to learn my lesson and just sit here. We were trying to figure out what to do with my bag, so the guy was pushing the wheelchair. I was holding onto the suitcase so that it would roll along beside us. And then I realized that they only take you to just right outside the door. They don't actually take you to the parking lot. So my friend was there waiting for me, and I basically just stood up and walked away, which, I always feel like awkward about. Like, it just looks so funny when I stand up because I appear able-bodied, and people are probably like, why does she need a wheelchair? And at that point, I was able to walk to the car just fine. We went to the store after that, and I was really surprised that I wasn't more exhausted. But, if I had to walk that whole time, I'm sure I would have been absolutely miserable by the time I arrived. And then I had another flight a few days later, and I had requested a wheelchair for that one too. What they did was everyone who needed a wheelchair for long distances but could still get off the plane, they had like one of those cart things where they seat you on there and they drive you to the gate, and then there was a point where they stopped and they said, beyond here, only the people who need wheelchairs. And a lot of people just got up and walked away, and it was really late, and it was like everyone was wanting to go home for the night. So again, I'm like, alright, I'll just walk, because they say it's just around the corner. And then of course you get around the corner and you see there's this really long hall, and it's again like, oh god, like why didn't I just wait for the wheelchair? So, I don't know, it's kind of difficult to judge either way, especially if you don't know the airport and you're dealing with different people every time. But I'm definitely glad I took advantage of this experience. There's so many times where I wish I had a wheelchair available in just normal situations. There's times when, maybe I could get around without a wheelchair, but I just need someplace to sit when I'm out someplace in public, and there's no provision for that sort of in-between space. So, I mean, years ago when I was at the point where I just wanted to lay down on the sidewalk because I was so exhausted, I was thinking I could use a wheelchair now, but at the moment when I leave the house, I don't need one, so I don't want to use it more than I have to, but it's not like it can just magically appear when I need it either. And another thing I wanted to bring up was that I can swim, actually, and I find this interesting because I've heard about some studies showing that people with Parkinson's who can't even write their name or walk can ride a bike just fine because it's controlled by a different area of the brain. And I don't know if it has anything to do with that, but I feel like standing and walking, and especially going upstairs, is so exhausting for me. But I can swim, and it's not like I'm swimming an insane amount because obviously I'm not used to being that active anymore, but the amount that I swim, I feel, is a lot compared to the amount that I'm able to walk. And a couple years ago, around that period when I was at my worst, I actually had a bike, and people couldn't understand how I could bike to the store, but I couldn't help them clean up around the dorm. And I'm just like, well, biking is easier because you just glide, and I don't have to support my weight because I'm leaning on the handlebars. So somehow it is easier. It's easier than walking for me. But I know it seems like contradictory, but it's easier for me to bike or swim than it is to walk. And even though I'm not like quivering when I stand up out of the wheelchair, I'm not limping or clinging on to things, I can support my weight. Walking is still really exhausting, and then the wheelchair is a huge help. So, and I think looks definitely can be deceiving. That's basically my one wheelchair experience. So so if you guys have ever used a wheelchair in public, how did that go for you? Did you feel uncomfortable about it? Did you get any looks or comments, any kind of negativity? Did you have a positive experience? For me, a lot of the time I was like talking to the people pushing me about how awkward I felt, and they were really encouraging and said that, yeah, most of the people who have the wheelchairs, they can walk. It's just the problem is they can't walk for long distances, or they can't stand for a long time. So they were very understanding. But how about you guys? Do you feel like you need a wheelchair and you're considering trying it? What thoughts are going through your head there. Do you have any questions? Let us know in the comments. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you like the channel, go ahead and subscribe. Don't forget we've got chronic illness awareness t-shirts in the Teespring shop. Go ahead and grab one of those. If you'd like to contribute to subtitles, especially translations into other languages, that would definitely be a huge help for all of the deaf and hard of hearing viewers and people in other countries for whom English isn't their first language. You can also support the channel by becoming a patron on Patreon and pledging as little as $1 a month. And you can support me directly by donating to my GoFundMe if you like. All of the links are in the description below, and I will see you guys next week.